something really creepy happened to me last month. I live in an apartment building. It's pretty standard for the most part. The place is nice, and most of the residents seem nice as well. It's not a dumpy place or anything, but it's not the greatest in the world either. I've lived here for almost 2 years, and it's been good. There's a mailroom just inside the doors on the first floor where we get packages and stuff. I order things online all the time, and I have an Amazon Prime account that I use a lot. It's very convenient because you can get next day delivery sometimes. I remember that my coffee maker broke one day and I decided to order a new one. I drink coffee quite a bit, especially in the mornings before work. So I found one on Amazon for next day delivery. I saw when I was at work the next day that it had been delivered, and I went down to the mailroom when I got back home from work. However, when I arrived in the mailroom, I couldn't find my package. There's usually a lot of packages in the mailroom, but I looked at each and every one of them, and mine was not there. I didn't know if somebody had took it by mistake or what, because it said that it had been delivered. So I went back up to my apartment, and I was going on Amazon trying to figure out how to get my money back or something. Then, suddenly, there was a knock on my door. This was nighttime, so I didn't know who could be there. I got up and walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. Nobody was there. I opened up the door out of curiosity. There, sitting on the ground, was my coffee maker. I picked it up and was just so confused. I brought it inside and saw that the box was already open. The coffee maker was inside of it, but I had no clue why it was left on my doorstep now. After thinking about it for a while, the only thing I could think of was that somebody else took it by mistake. Maybe they thought it was theirs and opened it and then realized that it wasn't theirs. I really didn't know. That didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, but I couldn't think of any other logical explanation. I also didn't know who had done it. I decided not to contact Amazon or anything. I figured this was just a freak thing and it wouldn't happen again. And at the end of the day, I had gotten my coffee maker like I had ordered. After a few days, I pretty much forgot about it. I used the coffee maker and it worked fine and everything. Well, sometime the next week, I ordered something on Amazon again. This time, it was skincare stuff. I went down to the mailroom to get the package when I got home from work again. It said that it was delivered. So when I looked in the mailroom, once more, I could not find it. When I looked at every package there and none of them had my name on it, I remembered back to the last time. I thought to myself, this better not have happened again. I went back up to my apartment and really did not know what to do. Sure enough though, later on in the night there was a knock at my door. I quickly went over to it and opened it. Whoever had knocked was gone, but my skincare products were also not outside the door. Instead, there was a note there. I picked it up and read it. It said, "To get your package, come to 112. That was the number of another unit on my floor. I didn't know all my neighbors or who exactly lived in 112, but I now knew who was stealing my packages. I did not go to the room to get it. Instead, I reported it to management of the apartment building. They ended up investigating by looking at the security footage. A guy who I had seen around a few times but never spoke to was the culprit. It showed him taking both my packages back to his apartment, then putting the things on my front step. He ended up getting evicted for it. Why he did that, I don't know. When I was in high school, during my junior year, I took a running class. It was a gym class, and we would do all kinds of running and jogging exercises. The class was overall pretty easy. I remember that the weather was pretty nice for most of the semester, so we would go outside a lot. One day in particular, our teacher took us across the street from the school and down the street a ways to a local park. It was a place that had jogging trails and a very large woods. At the time of the class, which was the morning, the park was very quiet and hardly anybody was there. Along with the teacher, we were supposed to jog around the trail for basically the entire class period. I remember that the teacher led the way and we all started jogging behind him. In the class with me was one of my good friends, David. We always talked during class and would jog together for most of the runs that we would go on. I remember that him and I were talking and we were at the very far back of the group. We didn't feel like trying hard that day and just wanted to take a nice easy jog at the back. Because we were going so slow, I remember that I was kind of looking around at the scenery as well. A good ways into the run and we approached this spot in the trail that had really thick woods. As we were running through this spot, I noticed something off the trail and into the woods. There was something black on the ground that did not look natural, such as a rock or a plant. It was very out of place being in nature, and at first I figured that it was just trash, like a box or something. But after jogging a few steps and not knowing what it was, I stopped. David saw that I was looking at something and asked what it was. We both walked into the woods a little bit to the spot to get closer. The item in question was about 25 feet or so off the path and partly obstructed by the leaves and plants on the ground. The woods were pretty dense, but when we got closer, I couldn't believe my eyes. There was a PlayStation 4 sitting there, and this is when they were the newest gaming system and were somewhat hard to get. David said, "Is that really a PS4? We went to get closer. However, when we were maybe 5 feet away, we heard the sound of movement to our left. We looked over and there was this guy standing about 20 feet away from us next to a tree and looked somewhat disheveled. The man shouted, 'Get away from me,' and then started to charge towards us. Both of us just turned and ran out of there. We got back to the path and then sprinted to catch back up with the rest of the class. Neither of us knew who the man was, obviously, or what he was doing in the woods. Did he live in the woods? Was that his PS4? Why was there a PS4 there? Those were the questions that were racing through my mind as I jogged the rest of the way. We finished up the class, and then we went through the rest of the school day. I couldn't stop thinking about the PlayStation 4 just sitting there in the woods, though. I didn't have one myself yet, and I obviously wanted one. After school, I met up with David again, and we both agreed to go back to the woods. We wanted to see if the PS4 was still there and if the man was gone. We were both a little bit nervous because the guy seemed like he might be dangerous, but it was worth the risk to us. David and I entered the park and then jogged back to the spot where we had seen the PS4. Sure enough, it was still there. We looked around and did not see the man, so we both entered the woods again. We went off the path and we approached the PlayStation. It was just sitting there on the ground by itself. There were no controllers or plugs hooked up to it. It was just the console alone. David and I picked it up and were about to leave when we heard a voice shout from behind us again. It was the same man with the beard. He screamed at us to stop. Then he demanded us to give him back his PlayStation. He looked terrifying, and so we did what he said. David set the PlayStation back down on the ground, and the man just stood there like 10 feet away from us. Then the man yelled at us to leave. We turned and sprinted out of there. Then we ran all the way back to the school and went home. It was a terrifying experience, and I wondered why the man who was seemingly living in the woods had a PlayStation 4. I mean, how would he use it? There was no TV in the woods that I saw, and where did he get it? It just seemed really weird. Well, later on, I got some answers. I found out that the PlayStation 4 had actually belonged to a kid that was in my grade. Apparently, the PlayStation broke, and he was really mad about it, so he took it out to the woods and chucked it. That's why there were no controllers or anything else there. It was in fact broken, so even if we had gotten it, it wouldn't have worked. Who the man was and what he was doing in the woods, though, I never found out. Years ago, I worked at Target. I've had many jobs since then, but one of the creepiest things that's happened to me came in my time there. So, I was still fairly new to the job. I should also mention that I was really young when I worked at Target. I was 17 years old, and it was literally the second job that I ever had. I lived with my parents and was in high school at the time. So, I'd been working there for maybe 2 or 3 months. I was a cashier, and one night I worked until 9:45 p.m. After getting off, I left Target and was walking in the parking lot to my car. Like right as I was leaving, I noticed this one guy who looked a little older than I was. He was wearing a red shirt and khakis, and I realized that he was probably a new coworker. I had never seen him before, but Target is a large store and is always getting new workers. I remember that the guy said hi to me, and I said hi back to him. He then asked me if I was just getting off, and when I said yes, he told me that he was as well, and he gave me a high five. I asked if he was new, and he said yes, he had just recently started. He asked me how my shift had gone, and after I told him about it, I asked him what he did. I hadn't noticed him at the registers, so I figured that he wasn't a cashier. He told me that he did a little bit of everything, and then said that he had been all over the place that night. Looking back, that's kind of an odd answer, but I didn't really think much of it at the time. As we talked, we were both walking out in the parking lot towards our cars. Then I remember that he asked me where I lived. I told him the basic general area, referencing a business that was pretty close to my house and right outside of my neighborhood. I remember that he said, "Nice, me too." I had not recognized him as having gone to my school or anything, but I guess it was possible he went to another school. I didn't bother to ask him what school he went to though, because just about then I arrived at my car. So I told him to have a good night and I was leaving now. The guy was nice and he said good night and kept walking. After I got in my car, I saw him get into a car that was parked adjacent to mine. I briefly looked at my phone like I normally did before leaving. The other guy seemed to do the same thing. Then I left. I began driving home, and I noticed that the guy started driving behind me. However, I thought nothing of it at all. He said that he lived right by me, so obviously he would be driving the same way. It took about 10 minutes to get back, and when I approached my neighborhood, the guy was still following me. As I turned off for the road right before my neighborhood, I remember seeing the guy keep going straight. I figured that's where he lived in that area, and I kept going. Now, this road that I was on, like I said, is right before my street. It's a very long road that also has a very low speed limit. So I was slowly making my way down, and after a while, I noticed a car pull onto the road. We were the only 2 cars on the road at this time, and the headlights looked the same as my coworker. I thought that it couldn't be though. I kept going and then turned onto my street. I drove to my house, which was not that far down. I parked in the driveway and then got out. In that time, I didn't see anything. However, right after getting inside, I noticed headlights in the street. I looked out and saw the same car that my coworker was driving down the street very slowly. I literally ducked down from the window, even though the chance of him looking into the house were slim. I really thought it was suspicious now what he was doing. We had lived on this street my whole life, and I had never seen this guy before. I was confident that he didn't live here. That made me suspicious that he had been following me. I'm not sure if he noticed my car in the driveway or not, because our driveway sort of curves out, and where I parked, it was sort of obstructed by trees. The rest of the night, I didn't see the guy, and I worked at Target for about 3 months after that. That entire time that I worked there, I never saw the guy again. I realized months later how strange that whole ordeal was. I don't think the guy worked at Target at all. I think he was just pretending to, and then he claimed to live in my neighborhood so that he could follow me home. Sure, maybe it was all a coincidence, but I really feel like it wasn't. I'm just glad nothing bad ever happened. In 2017, I went to a friend's birthday party. It was their 40th birthday, so it was a pretty big deal. I had recently lost my job and I was struggling with my mental health, but I had a very supportive husband and a good family life. It was a private house party, so I felt safe and excited to go to the party. My husband was supposed to go with me, but our childcare arrangements fell through at the last moment. I didn't want to go without my husband, but he felt like I needed a night out with my friends, and the birthday girl kept asking if I was coming, so I went. Like I said, it was a private party, and everyone there had been invited by the birthday girl. There were a half-dozen people I knew really well. Everyone else was a stranger, but I assumed that the birthday girl had good judgment and everyone there was all right. We were all having a great time laughing and dancing. At one point, I stepped outside to cool down and smoke a cigarette. A fellow male partygoer joined me. We talked about the birthday girl, how we knew her, and we talked about football. As it turned out, we were both from the same city and supported the same team. We returned to the party and he asked me if I wanted a drink. I said no and raised my glass to show him that I already had one. I then put my drink down and went to dance with the birthday girl. When I returned from the dance floor, I took a big gulp of my drink, and after that it all got a little hazy and I don't remember much at all. The rest of the story is pieced together from various sources and photos. There is a photo of the male party guest and me with another friend. I'm smiling at the camera with my arm around my friend and the guy next to me was kissing my cheek. I don't remember this. There's also a photo of me and the same guy who I had talked to where I'm leaning against him with my eyes closed. I don't remember any of these photos. I also don't remember talking anymore to the guy, and frankly, I don't remember much else about the night at all. I woke up the next morning at home on the sofa, and my husband was initially furious about the state I came home in, but he didn't know how bad it could have been. Apparently, several friends saw the guy who had drugged me earlier in the night trying to guide me into a waiting car, and they stopped him. When they challenged him, he said I agreed to leave with him, but I was incoherent at that point and had no recollection. A female friend took me home, which I also don't remember, but I know my friends saved me from something horrible. Once my husband knew what had happened, he was very supportive and concerned. I was later told how quickly my behavior had changed, and how quickly I had become uncoordinated and incoherent. I had never had my drink spiked before previously, but the scariest part to me was how quickly it happened. I gulped my drink, and like 2 minutes later I was incoherent and not able to remember anything from that night. That guy from the party had been decent friends with the birthday girl, but after that night had disappeared and no one was able to contact him or find him. This was all many years ago, and I saw the birthday girl recently, and she told me about the guy who drugged me and said he's currently in prison for assaulting his girlfriend in 2020. Please remember to always be careful with your drink. Never leave it unattended, no matter how safe the party seems. I made a mistake that night, and am forever grateful that my friends had been watching out for me. I've been a mailman for almost 10 years. For the past few years, I've had a walking route that I do every day. I live by the city, so there are some very large neighborhoods that I deliver mail to. I have a route that I go on, and I walk from one house to another with my large mail bag, dropping off the mail for each address. When the weather is nice, I really enjoy it because I get lots of good exercise from walking so much. In my entire time working the job, I've never been scared of anything, not even dogs. And that's mainly because I deliver in the morning time and not at night or anything. But one day, that all changed. I was delivering on my route through a very large neighborhood. There were tons of houses all pretty close to each other. So I was on the route, and at one point I came up to a house just like any other. The houses around there did not have mailboxes down by the street, but would instead be up next to the door of the house. So I walked up the steps to the front porch area with the mail ready to put it in the box. When I got there, I saw that the main door to the house was open and just the screen door was closed, so I could kind of see inside. There was a man standing not far away from the front door, and he looked over at me as I was walking up the steps. I just kind of nodded hello to him, and he seemed kind of surprised to see me. He didn't really react though, and then I stepped up towards the mailbox. However, when I was about to put the mail in, the man from inside suddenly spoke. He said, "Hey, can you just bring the mail inside here quick?" I said sure, and I opened the front door and stepped inside the house. After getting in, I saw the man, who was pretty tall and also large. He told me to set it on the kitchen table, which was about 10 feet away. I walked over and set the mail down, but as I was doing so, I heard the front door closing. I looked over and saw the man standing directly in front of it and facing me. He had a very serious and almost angry look on his face. Then I heard another man's voice from down the hallway somewhere in the house yell, "What's going on over there?" I was confused, but just wanted to leave and continue with my route. I started walking over to the man standing in front of the door. He wasn't moving at all though. Then I heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. I looked over and saw another man come walking into the room. He saw me and said, "The mailman." "No." I looked around and asked if I could leave. The big guy said to me, "No, you ain't leaving." I had a bad feeling, and I had had a bad feeling ever since the guy shut the door. I looked around and saw a back door. It was kind of just an instinct, but I took off and started running for it. As soon as I did, both men started to chase after me. I was able to make it to the door, but when I stopped to open it, the smaller man caught up to me and tackled me to the ground. There was a brief struggle, and the big guy came over there as well. Honestly, my mind kind of went blank, and I don't fully remember what happened. I just know that somehow I was able to fight them off just long enough to get up and make it out the door. I took off running outside, and the men briefly chased after me, but I was faster than them, and I ran down the street far away. When I realized they were not chasing me anymore, I stopped and I called the police. Then I waited there for them to arrive. They went to the house, but the men were gone. It turns out, though, that neither of the men owned the house. They had broken in and were robbing it. That made a little more sense to me as to what happened. I had been very confused. Despite being shaken up, though, I was thankfully not injured and was able to continue with my route for the day. Several days later, the police located the men who had done a string of robberies in the area. Looking back, I'm really glad that I made it out of there okay, and I'm glad that the men were caught. Back in 2016, my friends and I for the longest time had been itching to go camping to our local camping site in Los Padres National Park in Southern California. When we found the perfect weekend to go that didn't interfere with any of our work schedules, we set the date. 3 days before the trip, we found out that we were going to get hit by a rainstorm. Us being the type of dudes that we are, didn't care if we got hit by the storm while camping, so we packed up our cars and made the 45-minute drive to the campsite. The campsite was a family-friendly one where there were about 100 camping lots that circled around the clearing in the forest. We found the perfect spot that was underneath huge thick trees that would help block as much rain as possible, and it also helped that the restrooms were only 30 yards away. As soon as we got to our spot, we took advantage of the afternoon sky being clear for the moment, and we rushed to set up. The layout that we did was that we pitched our tents close by, where our tent doors were only 6 feet apart. The reason we did this was in order to combat the rain. I brought a 30-foot by 30-foot thick blue canopy tarp that I threw over to cover us from the rain above and from the rain that would be running on the ground. It ended up being perfect for the rainy weekend, but whenever you would walk around the tent, you would be making so much noise from crunching the plastic tarp. Hours passed by and we were all around the campfire. It was late into the evening, and this was the first time that I noticed that there were barely any other campers. Mainly the other people were camping in their RVs. They were the smart ones, unlike my friends and I that were sleeping in 2 small tents, with our only protection from the rain being the blue tarp. I was getting tired from a long day of work, and I decided that I was going off to knock out, and my friends followed my lead as well. The way that the sleeping arrangements were was that I had my friend Ray sleeping in my tent, and Adam and Seth were sleeping in their own tent. Before I called it a night, I whispered to Ray and told him, "I'm going to prank call Seth and Adam, but I'm not going to say anything." Ray smiled as I dialed my friends up. I called them on a restricted number. Ray and I were holding in our laughter as they ignored our call. I decided to do it one more time. They did answer this time, and Seth replied with a nervous hello into the phone. Ray and I had to hold in our laughter as we kept as quiet as possible, not wanting to make any noises that would give off that it was us. I held the phone close to my mouth as I began to breathe heavily in a murderous way. I ended the call, and just hearing them freak out the way they did was fun. They eventually asked if it was us, and after a while, Ray gave in and let them in on the joke. We all eventually calmed down from laughing, and since I fall asleep relatively easily, I was out in a matter of minutes, while Ray, Adam, and Seth were up for a while longer. I was the first of my friends to wake up in the morning, and I had breakfast already cooking by the time everyone else woke up. The smell of me cooking woke my friends up one by one, and they got out of their tents. As we were eating, Adam spoke up and said, "Hey, the prank that you both pulled last night went a little too far." They went on to say that it was one thing to prank call, but then to walk around their tent and go inside of it in the middle of the night was totally off limits. I had no idea what they were talking about, and after some back and forth of questioning and firmly stating no more pranks had been pulled last night, I heard the full story. So, to explain, after I fell asleep, about an hour passed by where Ray, Seth, and Adam were still up. All was quiet in the forest until the sounds of footsteps were heard stepping on our blue tarp that was on the ground. At first, my friends thought that it could have just been a forest animal wandering around, but the heavy footsteps were a dead giveaway that it was a person. The person had been walking all around our tents, making constant figure eights. The person would also place their fingers on the tent fabrics and run them up and down. The footsteps finally stopped after a couple of minutes, right between the doors of our tents. The 3 of them already had their hearts pounding out of their chests. It was silent for a long time, until the sound of a tent zipper being slid open was made. As Adam said, the tent door was only open about halfway, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. But in the darkness, both Seth and Adam saw the silhouette of a man's face pop his head into the tent to look at both of them. Adam and Seth faked being asleep the entire time, but they kept their eyes locked onto the man. The man then opened the tent fully and walked inside the tent, just standing in the entrance. The man didn't say a word or do anything, just watched the both of them laying in their sleeping bags. After the longest minute ever, the man just stepped back out of the tent and his footsteps were heard walking away, disappearing into the night. The entire time that this was happening, Seth and Adam thought that it was either me or Ray doing this as another prank, and Ray thought that it was Adam or Seth doing this. Back to us arguing back and forth at the breakfast table, we were interrupted by a man walking to our campsite, and he greeted us with, "Good morning, boys. How did the 4 of you sleep last night?" This man spoke in a smoker's voice, and he wore a dirty, sweat-stained white t-shirt, and his blue jeans looked as they had never been washed. He smelt like liquor, and his words were all mumbled together. We didn't say a word to this guy, and he asked us if we had any cigarettes to spare him. I told him that we didn't smoke, and he said, "Oh, well, if you boys want to visit me in my RV, just stop by any time." The man continued to walk away towards the restrooms, and as he was done using it, walked back to our campsite. He didn't say anything this time, but he looked at us and gave us a nearly toothless smile, and he walked back to his RV. I took note of his RV, as it was the only RV that stuck out as being dirty and more run down than the others. We quickly summed up the man as the person who was walking around our tents last night, and Seth and Adam now remembered that they smelt liquor from the person who was standing in their tent. We all agreed that we would keep an extra eye out on this guy, and if he did spend another night, we would most likely report him to the park rangers if he tried anything else. When it was around lunchtime now, the man came back, not to use the restroom, but just to talk to us. He started the conversation and said, "So, are any of you boys interested in buying an RV? You can all go check it out right now. Look inside and see if you want to buy it." We told him that we were good, and this time while talking to him, we all responded very simply and sternly. The man seemed to notice this, and he walked away. The man did end up leaving a few hours before sunset, but the entire time that he was there, he kept glancing at us. The man had his RV about 50 yards away from us, and I noticed that he had a restroom right next to his RV. Why did he make an effort in walking all the way over to our campsite to use our restroom? Also, why did he even use the restroom if RVs come with restrooms installed in them? Whatever the man wanted, we were just glad that we were able to enjoy the rest of our weekend in peace after he left. In around 2018 or 2019, I was living in Nebraska where I grew up. I lived in the largest city in Nebraska, but it was still essentially surrounded by corn and wheat fields. The city was expanding, so rich folks started building huge houses with giant properties on the edge of town as things proceeded to grow. All of that being said, I had a good friend whose parents' house was one of the big ones right on the blurring line between the fields and the city. It was spring break, and none of us were going anywhere exotic for vacation over the break. So my friends and I took advantage of the time we had off from school by spending every day at my friend's nice property out there. They had tons of property to ride four-wheelers on, a hot tub, and had a huge living room for us to watch sports and have reality TV binge sessions. Plus, the parents were super cool, and we could drink out there as long as we stayed at the house. It was tons of fun for a spring break spent in town. I would just not go outside after a certain time once it got dark though, because there was little lighting and the nearest neighbor was about a mile away. I've always felt weird energy driving to and from her place if it was late at night, but nothing had ever happened until one night over the spring break when I was driving back home. The drive out there was a long winding two-way road that had thick trees on both sides, and you passed by one of the city's largest cemeteries on the way. Barely any lighting, of course, besides the street lamps every once in a while, and very little traffic. It's all inherently a bit creepy, and I'll admit to having sped through this section of roads many times to get through it as quickly as possible. This specific night was perfect spring weather, so I was driving back home with my windows down listening to music, and it was around 10 p.m. I was coming around one of the curves in the road when I had to essentially slam on my brakes. Right in front of me, in the middle of the road, maybe 50 yards away, was what looked like a family. Again, picture a completely pitch-black road with thick forest on both sides, and only my headlights to show what was in front of me. There was a family of 3 or 4, including a tall, slim woman, an average height and weight man, and a child with short hair, and the mother was pushing a stroller. The clothes looked normal, not tattered, but not nice clothes. They also were not carrying any kind of light source, meaning before I arrived behind them in my car, they'd been walking in the pitch black. They were all facing away from me, walking completely silent in the middle of the street the same direction I was headed. I had to turn my music down to hear if they were speaking or had been playing music, but they didn't. The hairs on my arms immediately stood up. I came to a stop in the road behind them obviously, and just sat there for a moment to let them move. They seemed to be completely unaffected by me, and didn't even turn their heads to look at me, nor did they attempt to move out of my way. I thought I was going insane, or that I was dreaming. It was so surreal. Before I really had time to fully process and register what I was seeing and how truly strange it was, they all at the same time stopped walking and very slowly turned to face my car. This scared me immensely, and I honestly didn't even give myself enough time to look at their faces as they turned. I immediately threw my car into reverse and sent it backwards for probably a full 20 seconds before flipping a U-turn. Then I booked it in the other direction. The only thing I remember noticing is that the stroller looked to be completely empty. This was the part that sticks in my mind the most. I've never felt terror like that in my life. I ended up going back to my friend's house and sleeping over that night, and I checked in my rearview mirror probably 1,000 times before getting back to the house, and I never saw a glimpse of them. In fact, I've drove that road many times since then, and have never seen the family again, night or day. I tried asking my friend and her family about it, only to essentially feel like I was insane because of the way they looked at me. It was and still is the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. I think about it all the time. It was either some weird family trying to scare someone, a distraction for an attempted robbery, or it was something more sinister. I'm going to tell myself for probably the rest of my life that it was the first option. This happened back many years ago. I was in high school in the early 2000s, and one night my parents went out. They left me and my older sister at home, so it would just be the two of us at the house for dinner. Now, at the time, my older sister was 17 years old, and I was 14. We lived in a house in a pretty typical neighborhood. Our parents left us some money to order a pizza or something, and that was the plan. When it got to be like 7 p.m., I told my sister that I was hungry and we should order from this one pizza place that was my favorite. She agreed, and then she called the store with our order. Around 20 minutes later or so, we were just in the living room watching TV, and the doorbell rang. My sister got up and answered with the money that our parents left us. I was like half paying attention as I was more focused on the TV. I heard my sister answer the door and the pizza guy say hello and stuff. I remember that I heard the pizza man ask my sister if she was home by herself, and she replied just saying no. The man said something like, "Oh really?" He couldn't see me from where I was in the living room. The guy said something else, but I couldn't really hear it. I heard my sister respond, but couldn't really make out what she was saying either, but it sounded like she was talking in a kind of rude way. I looked over at that point and saw that my sister appeared kind of annoyed. She handed the money to the guy, and then as he was still saying to have a good night, she slammed the door in his face. Then my sister locked the door as soon as it was shut, sighed, and started walking back over to the living room. I asked her what that was all about. She said, "I forgot about that creep." She went on to say that she was at her friend's house like 2 weeks prior, and the two of them had ordered a pizza. The same delivery guy was the one to show up. I guess that he acted really creepy, trying to flirt with my sister and her friend, and he even asked to come inside the house. They practically had to yell at him to leave and slam the door in his face. She said that she was planning to not order from that pizza place anymore because of him, but forgot about it. I thought that was weird, but I was glad that he was gone now and we had the pizza. I remember that just about 20 or 30 minutes later though, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like a car door closing. I looked out of the living room window and I saw the same pizza guy walking up to the house again. He had a small box in his hands and I wondered why he was at our house again. We hadn't ordered anything else. I warned my sister and she got up and said that she was going to call the police. Before she could though, the man started ringing the doorbell again. My sister and I ignored it at first. Then there was a knock on the door. My sister walked over to the door, did not open it or anything, but yelled at the man to go away. He yelled back from the other side, saying that he brought her a free brownie. She said she didn't want it and was going to call the police if he didn't leave now. What the man said next really creeped me out. He said that he knew my sister was alone and asked for her to let him in. That's when I knew I had to do something. This guy apparently really thought that she was home alone. I stood up and walked over to the door. Then, trying to sound tough, I yelled really loud in my manliest voice that I was also home and that I was going to come out and beat him to a pulp if he didn't leave. At first, I thought it didn't work. The man said something like, "Who's this tough guy?" He still stood around on the front step and didn't seem too affected, as my sister was now dialing the police. The guy laughed a little, as if trying to sound like the whole thing was a joke to him. Then, he finally turned and started walking off. I remember that he walked back to his car and then got in and drove away. The police still came to our house a while later though. My sister made a report and then the cops went to his work. I heard that the man later got fired. Thankfully, he did not come back to our house again after that. I'm glad that I was home that night and was able to help out my sister. The guy was a total creep, and hopefully he didn't harass anyone else like that. I work at Starbucks, and something happened a few weeks ago that really freaked me out. For a little background, I'm an 18-year-old female and have worked at Starbucks for about 6 months. So I was working until close one day, and I was behind the counter making drinks for most of the time. For much of the shift, I was kept pretty busy. I didn't really notice many of the people that would be sitting around inside. Our location is large enough that there's a good amount of tables and seats. It's fairly popular for people to bring their laptops and work and things like that. At one point, I noticed a few of the people sitting around. One of them was this guy sitting alone at a table on his laptop. He was probably about middle-aged, had dark hair, and was wearing a blue jacket. When I noticed him, he was staring at me. He didn't look away though when I saw him. I had to look away because it was weird. But then I just kept working and I didn't think about the guy or look over in his direction anymore. Hours later though, when things quieted down significantly, I was not quite as busy. At that point, I noticed the very few people that were still inside. I think there were just 2 or 3 people sitting around. One of them was the same guy from earlier, and when I noticed him, he was staring at me again and once more did not look away. It was almost unsettling how weird it seemed to me. I also thought that it was weird at first how he had been there for so long, but I guessed it wasn't that strange for people to work all day in a coffee shop after all. As we approached closing time, it was now just me and another coworker. The other customers soon left, but the man remained. The closer it got to closing time, the more nervous I was. Was he just going to keep sitting here past close? Thankfully, with about 5 minutes left before we closed for the night, I saw him getting up to leave. Then he walked out the door, and I felt better. I stayed for a while longer until I was good to go. After I left work, I just drove straight home that night. The Starbucks is in an area with lots of other stores and restaurants right nearby, and it's always kind of busy over there. I live with my parents at their house, which is about a 10-minute drive from the Starbucks. So I drove home and then went inside. It was probably like 9 p.m. by that point. I just remember that maybe about 10 minutes or so after getting back, I noticed this car parked on the side of the street outside. It was pretty much across from our house, and the engine of the car was running. What was strange is that it's pretty unusual for cars to be parked on the side of our street. It's not really in the city, and everybody has large driveways. I saw the lights to the car turn off, and I just decided to go over to the window and look at it. When I got closer, I noticed that there was somebody inside the driver's seat. It looked just like the same guy who had been at the Starbucks staring at me. At first, I thought that I was paranoid thinking about the guy, and there was no way that it was really him. But then he looked over at the house. I saw him for like a second, and then I quickly ducked down so that he wouldn't see me. I realized in that moment that it was for sure the same guy. This kind of freaked me out, because of course I wondered if he had somehow followed me home or something. I went away from the window, and I didn't want him to see me or anything. But a short time later, my curiosity got the better of me, and I went back. Not only was the car still there, but the man was still in the driver's seat and appeared to be looking at me. I moved away from the window again and found my dad, who was thankfully still up. He decided to go outside and confront the man. However, as soon as my dad left the house and began to walk towards the car, it quickly drove away. I figured that was pretty incriminating and that he probably wasn't just there because he was lost or something. Since then, I have not seen the man, not in my neighborhood and not at Starbucks, and I'm really happy about that. I'm hoping that I never see him again. My company used to have another office in another state that was 2 states over. Most of the time I flew there, but sometimes we would have equipment or vehicles that needed to be delivered. On those cases, I volunteered to make the trip and would stay at the other office for a week at a time. Sometimes I would take a rest stop at a motel, and sometimes I would break up the drive by pulling over to a rest stop and sleeping in the back of the vehicle for a bit. One time I was driving a big box truck, like a big truck you would rent at U-Haul. We bought the truck used, and the back of the truck was filled with equipment and stuff from that office. I offered to make the trip. Unfortunately, the morning I was scheduled to take off, there was a delay for something I needed to take in that truck. I think it was a large copy machine, and it didn't arrive until almost 3 p.m. After loading it in the truck and getting ready to take off, I knew I was going to hit rush hour traffic, so I opted to delay my leave for 2 hours so I wouldn't leave until after 5 p.m. Even though there was still lots of traffic, it would only be local in the vicinity, and once I got out in the open, it was pretty much a straight shot until I reached the state line. Having to pull over a couple of times for fuel and restroom breaks, I got into a rural area north of my state after midnight. I pulled over one last time that night for fuel and coffee. The next stretch was going to be very dark and desolate, so I was preparing myself. I knew there was one more rest stop near the border, so I pulled over there to use the restroom, stretch my legs, and rest for a few minutes before moving on. When I pulled up to the rest stop, it was empty. It was somewhat well lit, and I am and was in pretty good shape, so I wasn't worried too much about my safety as I used to box. I went to the restroom and washed up a bit, but when I made it back to my truck, there was a pickup truck next to my truck and a guy standing next to my truck as well. He started to make small talk, and then he asked me if I was having any mechanical problems with my truck. I thought it was odd that he asked me that. I got back in my truck and took off. After this point, there's a long stretch that's mostly forest area, and it's kind of creepy to drive through it at 3 a.m. Having driven this route before, I knew there was a bridge up ahead. Suddenly, all the lights in my truck turned off. Headlights, instrument lights, even the running lights. I tapped on the brakes and looked behind me. Even the brake lights seemed to be out. Thankfully, it was a moonlit night, enough to be able to gauge what was ahead of me. I was more angry than panicked, so I slammed my fist on the dashboard and yelled. I guess that was the right move, because after I slammed the dashboard, suddenly everything came back up again. The lights were all fine. I drove looking for somewhere to stop, like a gas station, motel, shopping center, anything. I remembered a gas station I had stopped at another time, which was in a city about 10 miles up the road. I made it to that gas station and noticed that shortly after I pulled in, the same pickup truck with the same guy pulled over. He didn't pull up to the gas pumps and stayed in the street, but suddenly I got this chilled feeling like this guy did something to my truck while I was inside the rest stop earlier. I started to put some fuel in the truck, thinking about my next move. Then, just as I was about to get back in my truck, a cop car pulled into the station and I waved it down. I got out and made some small talk to the cop and pointed in the direction of the street where the pickup driver was pulled over. After I did that, the truck drove off. I think I asked the police about the road conditions and asked them if there was a motel or something ahead. When I got back in my truck, I decided that if the guy had done something that might disable my truck, I better pull off for the night. I kept looking behind me to see if the truck was following me. I think it was, but I couldn't be sure. I made it to another town a little bit larger than the last one I had left, and there was a motel. I checked in, locked my truck, grabbed my bag, and kept looking around, expecting something to pop out. I didn't sleep well that night, but nothing out of the normal happened. In the light of day, I eventually made it to the office, and I asked them to have the truck looked at by a mechanic. I told them the issue, and they reported back to me after I was home that the mechanic had found nothing wrong, and they didn't experience the same issue while driving it back. Maybe the mechanic overlooked something. That man gave me the creeps though, and I'm positive that he did something to my truck and was following me. Maybe he would have made his move if I ever pulled over on the highway to address the issue. About 10 years ago, I moved into a new house with my wife and our daughter, who at the time was very young. It was a nice neighborhood with many other houses, but one thing I was really excited about was the yard. We had lived in a small townhouse before that and barely had a yard at all, and the new neighborhood had a lot more space. Our yard was almost an acre, and I would say most people over there had about that as well. So after moving in and getting all the furniture in the house and stuff, there was a lot of work that I wanted to do in the yard. For example, there wasn't much landscaping. The grass had some dead spots, and there was a good number of weeds in the backyard. So one day, soon after moving in, I went outside to do a bunch of the yard work. My wife stayed inside the house with our daughter. I remember that I worked for a few hours, and then I had to go to Home Depot to get some stuff. I left and came back pretty quickly. I don't recall much of that trip because it was pretty normal. However, after I got back, I went into the backyard, sort of on the side of it. From where I was working, I could see part of the street in front of our house. The street was normally very quiet because it's just residential. A short time after getting back, I saw this older car pull up and park on the side of the road. It was parked between our house and the next door neighbors. I didn't think too much of it until I saw a man get out and then just sort of stand inside of our yard on our property. Then the man was looking at me as he slowly walked in my direction. He was moving extremely slow and I didn't know who he was. I had met both next door neighbors as well as the ones across the street, and this guy wasn't any of them. He was kind of standing around and also kind of walking closer, and I stopped what I was doing and I began to walk over to the man to see what he wanted. However, as I approached, the man turned and then went to my left and very quickly went out of my sight because the house now blocked him. I walked faster and then arrived in the front yard, but I didn't see the man. I thought that maybe he was going to knock on our front door, but when I looked, he wasn't there. I quickly went inside and called to my wife, asking if anybody had entered the house just to be safe. Thankfully, she said nobody had. So I went back out and I looked all around the front yard and then went into the backyard as well. I didn't see the man. I wasn't quite sure where he went. There were a good number of trees and bushes around people's properties, but I didn't think that the guy was hiding or anything. I figured that he must have just cut through our yard to maybe get to somebody else's. The whole thing seemed really strange because the man's behavior was kind of odd. But overall, I didn't know what else to do, so I just went back to work. I got quite a bit of yard work done, and things were looking much better. I remember noticing that after several hours, the man's car was still there. I continued with the work though, and when I was almost done, I remember that out of nowhere, I heard something behind me. When I looked back, I saw the guy again. He was in my backyard and like 50 feet away from me. After seeing him, the man looked at me, and I called out, asking what he was doing in my yard. The man didn't answer me. I started to walk over to him, and he quickly turned and started walking in the other direction. The man then went behind some trees on the edge of the property. I walked over there and looked around. I called out for him several more times, but he never answered me, and I didn't know where he went. Pretty soon, I gave up looking for him. He seemed to be off my property. Really, I had no idea who this guy was or what he was doing, but he was seeming really suspicious. So I went back to work, and I remember that maybe 20 or 30 minutes later, I heard a car door closing. I moved over to get a view of the street, and I saw the car driving away. This made me feel a ton better knowing that the man was now gone. So I finished up with the work for the day, and I had the backyard looking a lot better. Then I went inside. The next morning when I got up and looked outside, I saw that the backyard was all messed up. Somebody had literally messed up most of the work that I did. I was so mad, but I also had a feeling that it was that same guy. Of course, I had no proof. I had to do most of the work over again, and I also went out and bought security cameras and put them up. However, after that, the man never returned. This has remained a strange mystery. About 25 years ago, I used to work at a gas station. It was one that was somewhat off a country road and only like 5 minutes from where I lived. I would work the overnight shift because the station was open 24 hours. This is something that was both creepy and easy typically. There wasn't a whole lot that had to be done overnight. The store part of the gas station was pretty small. It had a good amount of snacks and drinks, so I would do some stocking of the shelves and organizing here and there. Most of the time, though, I would just sit behind the counter. We had this TV that was hanging from the ceiling in the corner that I used to watch at a really low volume. Without that, I would have been truly bored out of my mind most nights. But the TV was amazing, because this was before smartphones, so I couldn't just go online or whatever. During the day, a lot of people would drive on the road that the gas station was on, and they would stop. At night, though, it was kind of the opposite. We would seldom get any customers. An occasional car would drive by and sometimes stop in for fuel, but normally if they did, they wouldn't come inside of the store. In fact, the gas station stopped being open 24/7 sometime in the late 2000s, and about 5 years ago it was converted into a smoke and vape shop. But back to the story. To be honest, when people did stop there at night, I always hoped that they wouldn't come inside, because being by myself in the middle of the night, whenever anybody came in, it always seemed kind of sketchy. There were a few strange people, but overall not that many scary experiences. One really stands out though. It was a night like any other. The time was roughly 2 o'clock in the morning, so this was among the quietest times of night for me. I was just sitting behind the counter and looking around the empty shop. To my right was the door to go inside, as well as 2 very large windows looking out to the gas pumps. Surrounding the station all around was pretty much wildlife. There was a dense woods right across the street, and next to the property was some tall grass and quite a bit of trees scattered around as well. We hadn't had any customers in the gas station in well over an hour. I don't think that I had seen a car in a long time either. I remember glancing out of the windows though and noticing what appeared to be a man. He was walking slowly from the sort of wooded field area next to the gas station and making his way towards the gas pumps. It was really strange to see because there was no real place that he would be coming from. After making his way to the pavement, he just kind of started standing around for a while. It was very strange. I kept watching him because I was very curious as to where he had come from and what he was doing. The man was bald, looked to be maybe in his 40s or so, and had a slight beard on his chin, I remember. He was also wearing sunglasses. After standing around and looking the other way mostly for like 2 or 3 minutes, he started to walk towards the gas station. I thought at that point that he was going to go inside. He walked all the way towards the doors. Then the man stopped, took out a cigarette, and started smoking it. He did not go inside the store. After smoking for a couple minutes, he then started walking away and crossed the quiet street. Then the guy literally walked right into the woods, which had me really puzzled. It was very strange because there was no path to go into the woods or anything. It was just like dense forest all around. That alone was one of the strangest things I had ever seen. But it got weirder. So maybe 30 minutes later, we still hadn't had any more customers. Out of nowhere, I saw movement outside and I looked up. I was just on time to see the same man emerging from the woods. After that, he walked across the street and back onto our property. This time, though, he walked all the way to the front door and actually went inside. When he was in the shop, he started walking for the counter. I said hi to him, and the man said that he needed $1,500. I had a bad feeling when he said that, but hoped that I was misunderstanding him. I asked what he meant. The man then demanded that I give him $1,500. His voice was now angry. I looked at him, and he wasn't holding any kind of a weapon or anything, but he was leaning in fairly close. I didn't know if he had one on him, but I always kept a bottle of pepper spray just behind the counter in case. When the man demanded it again, he leaned towards me even closer and shouted. That's when I took the pepper spray, pointed it right at his face, and let it rip. The man was instantly blinded by it and moved backwards. He grabbed his eyes, and I yelled at him to get out of the store and that I was calling the police. The man backed away and thankfully left. When he got outside, he walked around covering his face, then crossed the street again and went back into the woods. It was very weird. I kept an eye out for the rest of my shift, but I didn't see the guy again. In fact, I never saw him for the rest of the time that I worked there. It was one of the weirdest situations I've ever had. I live in northern British Columbia, Canada. A couple of years ago, my friend had invited me to come with him, his mom, and his sister to a resort by a lake an hour and a half or so out of town. This was the end of June and beginning of July. The place is called a resort, but it's more like a cabin in the woods type of place. There's a main log building where you check in, and it has a restaurant, a few log cabins, and some spots down by the lake for RVs to park in. There's a highway that you turn off up to the lot where the check-in building is, and to the right of the highway is forest for miles, as well as everywhere else around that area. Around the lake there's some houses and whatnot, but if it isn't a long weekend, there's not too many people out there. The cabins and RV area is separate, and the main building is about a 5 to 8 minute walk away from the cabins up a spiral road. A little bit past the main building, there's a clearing where you can sit at a couple of tables, and about 50 feet into the woods past those tables are two small lagoons surrounded by an old wire fence. When we got in for the evening, we unloaded the car, got acquainted with the log cabin, which was nice, and then we went out to explore around. Not too much interesting stuff happened the first day, as we didn't explore a whole lot before dark. Skip to the next day, and it was cloudy and raining, which we were hoping for, as that meant that there were very few people at the resort, and we'd get free rain over it. We explored down by the lake and around the cabin areas more thoroughly, and eventually we made our way up to the clearing where the tables are located. We looked at the tables to see that they hadn't been touched in what looked like a very long time from the amount of grass and weeds that was built up around them. While investigating, I took notice that around 50 feet or so back into the woods, there was what looked to be a clear area. We slid down into this ditch-like area, which was probably around an 8-foot difference in elevation from the table area, and trampled through the brush. We eventually came to this spot, which we were pretty sure were lagoons due to the way they were constructed, and we noticed that there was a wire fence around it. We tooled around the area looking at the lagoons, and eventually we left, planning to come back later in the day as it was getting time to eat dinner. The next day we went back to that area with the tables, planning to go into the lagoon area once again, but before we had a chance to go down the ditch, we stopped because of a noise. The noise we heard were two small twigs being walked over and snapped in the lagoon and ditch area we had traveled the previous day. We stuck around for about 10 minutes or so until we got hit with an intense feeling of dread at being attacked by a bear or some other animal that could be walking around in the lagoon area. We went back to our cabin where we played poker for the rest of the night. While playing, we discussed the events that had taken place and eventually laughed it off, saying it was probably just a bear passing through or rabbits in the area. The next day, it was raining heavily and much darker than the past couple of days. We left our cabin and planned to go to the lagoon area later, but we wanted to chill around a medium forested area close to the cabins first. We were messing around in the woods, breaking big sticks on trees. Suddenly, we had heard what sounded to be someone else doing the same thing about 200 feet away in the direction we were facing. It was hard to judge how far exactly it was because of the way the forest carries sound, but it was far in front of us. At first, we thought it was an echo, but after experimenting a little more, we found out that it wasn't an echo. Someone or something out there was also banging sticks, copying us. We wouldn't have cared too much about this until we took notice of where it was. The entire area around there and beyond was all forested and not near any of the cabins. Having someone in those forests along with us that far in, and in the less favorable weather with being very few people at the resort at that time, was unlikely. We decided to leave the area and come back later during the evening. So after leaving the area, we went back around to the lagoon area and listened for a couple minutes. We couldn't hear any walking, so we assumed that we were right about it being a passing forest creature yesterday. Not even 5 minutes into us being around the lagoon area, I told my friend to stop moving. We both stopped and listened. We heard what sounded to be the footsteps again, but as they were coming in louder and faster, we got that same overbearing feeling of dread. We hightailed it out of there spooked, and we booked it back to our cabin. Later that evening, we returned to the forest clearing area where we had heard the branch against the tree noise earlier in the day. We again started smacking branches against trees, this time not hearing anything, but as I turned to my left, something caught my eye. There was what appeared to be a person standing behind a tree, and I saw them duck behind it when they noticed that I noticed them. I nearly screamed, but I held it in and immediately told my friend that we needed to get out of there, and we sprinted back to the cabin. Later that night, while sitting in the loft area where our beds were, we discussed what had happened the last 2 days. The area that I had seen the person was in the exact same area where we had heard the mimic banging earlier that day. Also, both days we had been down near the lagoon area and had heard footsteps walking around. It was very creepy, as there was too much of a coincidence for the person or figure I had seen to not have been watching us and following where we were going both days. Very strange activity, as it was a rainy day and night both days that we were out exploring. We left the next day as our booking had ended, and I was happy that I didn't have to stay there any longer, being constantly watched. Several years ago, I worked a temporary job as a part-time security guard. It was a job that I was not really qualified for, but I guess there wasn't really any requirements. There was this building in the sort of downtown area of the city that I lived in. The building was a mix of some offices and some other businesses. It went up several stories and connected to other buildings as well. During the day, the building was open and there would be somebody who worked at the main desk. Many people would walk through the building during the day, but at night it was closed, and for some reason they still needed a security guard. I would literally just sit in the desk all night and do nothing. Nobody ever came to the building, and I never had to talk to anyone. I wore a security guard uniform that was similar to a cop's outfit, but I was certainly no cop, not even close. The only training I got really was to call the cops if anything happened. But on the other hand, I could just sit down and go on my phone for hours and get paid for it. I could play games and watch YouTube videos and do whatever I wanted really. I would also walk around the lobby area and some of the connecting hallways to get my steps in. I didn't mind the job much because it was just part-time, so it didn't really get old. Anyways, one night I was working, and by this point it was probably after midnight. I know that I was at my desk like usual when somebody knocked on the door. This was something that had never happened before. There were 2 glass doors that were at the main entrance. Obviously they were locked now. I wasn't really sure why somebody would be knocking on the doors, but I felt like it was my job to go and check. They also tried to open the doors as I got up, so I walked over to see who was there. When I arrived, I saw a relatively young woman standing there outside. It was a fairly cold night and a little rainy as well. By this time, really nobody else was out walking on the sidewalks or streets. When I got to the door, she was motioning for me to open it. I knew that I was to never let anybody in the building after close, so I tried to tell her through the glass that we were closed and she could not come in. She didn't seem to get it though, and motioned that she could not hear me and for me to open the door again. So reluctantly, I did. I opened the door just a small amount, and I told the woman that the building was closed. She said something like she was very cold and needed to use the restroom quick. I told her that the building was off limits, and I gave her directions to a building nearby that was actually open. She did not seem satisfied, but accepted what I said and started to walk away. Then I closed the door and went back over to my desk. That was the first time that anybody had ever come to the door while I was working. In fact, it was the first time that I had ever interacted with anybody at the job. However, not more than 20 minutes later, I heard a knocking at the door again. This was really weird, but then I figured that it was probably the same woman there again for some reason. I walked over and saw that there was now a man standing right outside the door. He had a hooded sweater on, but that didn't seem very suspicious because the weather would call for that. The man knocked again and waved me over. I walked over to him, and then without really giving it a second thought, I opened the door a crack. I was going to tell him the same thing that I told the woman. However, literally the second that I opened the door, the man barged his way in, pushing the door into me. Then he pushed me over, knocking me to the ground. Before the door swung back and closed, another man forced his way inside and stepped over me as I was on the ground now. I did not have any weapons, and I wasn't getting paid enough to stand there and fight the guys. So I got up and quickly ran out the door and left the building. The men were now both inside to do who knows what. I ran a safe distance away and I called the police. I walked around the sidewalks freezing cold, hoping that the men didn't come after me or anything. Soon though, the police got there and I flagged them down. 3 cars with a total of 5 officers arrived on scene, and some stayed and talked with me while others entered the building. And thankfully they were able to apprehend the 2 men who were still inside the building. They also tracked down that same woman who I had talked to earlier. Apparently she was the getaway driver for the men and was in on it, which made sense. After that I went back to work, but quit a short time after. That was a little too much action for me. I'm still mad at myself for opening the door and letting the guys in. I had just talked to the woman and that had gone fine though, so I wasn't really thinking. I guess maybe their original plan was to try to get her in the building. When that didn't work, they decided to go in by force. For a short time period, I used to work as a customer service representative during nights. It was a job that I did from home. I would work my normal job during the day and then work the night shift at home taking calls. I had a guest room in my apartment that I worked out of, and it was normally pretty easy. I used my guest room as an office, and from like 8 o'clock at night until midnight, I sat at my desk with my headset and my computer. I was able to take calls, help customers for the business that I worked for, and stay at home. I was working a lot at the time to save up money, and I only did 2 jobs at once for several months. For this job though, I wouldn't be getting calls all the time. I'd get maybe like 10 a night, so there was a lot of downtime where I could just relax mostly, and I got paid the whole time, which was good. So, nearing the end of my shift one night, it was shortly after 11 p.m. This was not necessarily a quieter time, but it was just later. I found that there was about the same amount of calls regardless of the time, but on this night I hadn't happened to get a call in a little while. So then I got a phone call and answered, except this was not the normal customer. When I said hello, at first nobody said anything on the other end of the phone. When I said hello again, this time I heard a man's voice start to speak. He did not sound normal though. It was like he was trying to disguise his voice or something. What he said next really creeped me out. The man told me that he was outside my apartment. I said, "Come again?" The man then said that he was right outside and claimed that he could see me. I asked if this was a prank, and he started laughing this creepy laugh. I didn't recognize the voice as anybody that I would know. I asked again why he called. The guy said that he just wanted to let me know that he was right outside my place and that I should go look. I didn't believe him at all. I said, "No, you're not." Then I hung up on him because I was not willing to play games with some prank caller. But then, moments later, there was a knock on my apartment door. Instantly, I was extremely nervous. I had truly thought that it was just a prank call, but now it didn't seem like it. I stayed where I was in my office. Then there was another knock on the door. I decided to get up and go and see who was there. I walked over to my front door, but by the time I got there, I looked out of the peephole and whoever had been there was gone. Then I got another call. When I answered it, it was the same person right away. He gave me another creepy laugh and asked why I didn't answer the door. I asked who it was in a nervous voice, and then he hung up on me. I was so creeped out, fearing that I was being stalked or something, and I called the police. I told them what happened, and they said they would send an officer to my location. As I was waiting for them to arrive, I got another phone call. When I answered it, it was the same person, but just laughter. It was really creepy. Then they hung up again. When the police officer arrived at my apartment, I told him what happened, and he looked all around the building. Unfortunately, he never located who did it. After that, for the rest of my time working that job, nothing else like that happened. I still don't know who did that to me or why. I used to work at Starbucks years back. It was an okay job. I was like 19 or 20, and this was a long time ago now, so I don't remember a whole lot, to be honest. But one thing that I do remember for sure was an event that took place one quiet night. The Starbucks I worked at was connected to a strip mall. We were on the far end though, and most of the other businesses were never that busy. We would get a decent amount of customers most of the time. So one day I worked a pretty normal shift. I don't really remember a whole lot from during the shift, but I was closing, and I know that after we closed at 8:30, another coworker, Jessica, and I were the only ones there. As we were cleaning up and preparing to leave, one thing that we had to do was take out the trash. I decided to do it, and I remember that the trash cans used to always get filled up really fast. They would also be very heavy. I took some trash bags, and I put one of them in a large trash bin out back behind the building. Behind the Starbucks is where it was, and other than that there was a small access road between a fence and some trees. It was normally very quiet back there. After I took out the first bag of trash, I went back inside for the other one, going just behind the counter. Then I made my way through the back room and outside again and tossed the second trash bag and then went back in. Jessica and I finished up with what we had to do over the next few minutes, but during this time, I remembered that we both heard a noise coming from the back room area. We both stopped what we were doing and looked at each other. At first, I was afraid that it was something like a mouse or a squirrel, because when I was taking out the trash, I had left the back door propped open between trips. The reason was because I had my hands full and I was only gone for like 30 seconds or so. The sound was not really that loud that we heard, but it was obvious. None of us knew exactly what it was, but I was very nervous about it. After it was quiet for like a minute, we decided to go look. so the two of us walked towards the back room and then entered it. We had a decent amount of storage space back there at our location. I remember looking around and at first seeing nothing, but when we started to walk around back there, suddenly I saw something. There were a few boxes sort of stacked in the corner. This man stood up from behind them and faced us. He had a beard and kind of looked homeless. Seeing him was really the last thing that I was expecting to see. I thought that maybe I had let a critter into the building, but no, there was a man here. He was holding a bottle of syrup in his hands. I finally spoke and said, "Who are you?" The man moved away and he was basically cornered. There was a shelf on wheels between him, Jessica, and I. The guy pushed the shelf over, nearly hitting Jessica and causing it to fall, and everything fell off of it, making a huge mess. Then the man jumped over the shelf and we both took a step back. After that though, he turned to the left and ran for the back door. Thankfully, he left the building after that. We were just glad he was gone, and Jessica and I went over and of course made sure the door was locked. Then we spent the next 20 minutes or so cleaning up the mess. After we were finally done and I was leaving, I saw the homeless guy walking through the parking lot. He was still holding the syrup bottle in his hands. I worked there at that Starbucks for a while longer and I never made the mistake of leaving the back door open again. However, I did hear that the guy used to hang out behind our Starbucks in the bushes quite often. Many years ago, when I was younger, I moved into this new apartment. The building itself was not that new, it was pretty average, but it was overall a decent place. After moving in, strange things started happening almost immediately. I can't remember if it was the first or second night that I was there, but there was a loud knock on the door late at night. It was probably at around 11 p.m., so this was very strange. I remember that I got up and went over to the door. I looked out to the other side and nobody was there. It was very strange. The whole thing kind of gave me the creeps. The way the knock was very clear and deliberate. It was no mistake. It was like they really wanted to get my attention. However, nothing else happened that night. But after that, for the next 3 or 4 nights in a row, there would be a loud knocking on the door very late. It would not always be at the same time. Sometimes it was at more like 10 o'clock and other times closer to midnight. I usually stayed up pretty late, so I was always still awake for it. But each time I would go over to the door and the person who knocked would be gone. It was obviously very strange. I wasn't really quite sure if I was being pranked or what, but I was new in the building, so I didn't know any of the neighbors yet or anything, and I'm not sure how any of them would know that I was there either. I hadn't really seen anyone on my floor when I was moving my things in. So that night, on like the 4th night in a row of hearing the knocks on my door, I heard something else. I went to go to bed a while later. I was in my bed and trying to fall asleep when I heard another loud knocking. This time, it was not coming from my front door though. Instead, it was coming from the wall right on the other side of my head. It caused me to sit up in bed and I was suddenly wide awake. It did not sound like somebody had accidentally smacked the wall or something like that. It sounded like they deliberately pounded on it, much like the knocking on my door. Could this be the same person? Was it my next door neighbor? But how would they know exactly where my bed was? I guess that maybe that was just a coincidence, but it left me feeling very creeped out. There were no more knocks that night. It took me a while to fall asleep, but eventually I was able to. So the next morning when I was leaving for work, I noticed the apartment door next to mine where I had heard the noises coming from. That unit was the very last one at the end of the hallway. I looked at the door and it was open a crack. I had to walk past it to get to the stairs. I thought about looking in, but then I thought, no way. I quickly moved past it and kept going. After getting home from work that day, the door was closed again. I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, but I was very confused. As I was arriving at my apartment though, I saw somebody who was out in the hallway. It was a woman who appeared to be in her 60s or so. She was walking in my direction, perhaps to leave, and I decided I would talk to her. I said hi and introduced myself, and she seemed very nice and friendly. She said that she had lived in the building almost 10 years. I asked her if she knew who lived next to me, and she told me that that apartment was currently vacant, so nobody lived there. Why had the door been open, and who was knocking on my wall from that apartment? The possibility creeped me out even more. I told her about the knocking, and she said that I should report it, and said that she had not experienced the same problem. After I went inside, I decided that if anything else happened, I would report it. Well, that night there was indeed more knocking on my front door late at night just as usual. I reported it to the management of the building. At first, I heard nothing back other than a response saying that they would look into it. The knocking continued the next night, and I also heard it on the other side of my bedroom wall again, which really freaked me out. At least whoever this was had never entered my apartment or attempted to that I was aware of. The next day though, I did not hear any knocking at all. I almost couldn't believe it. I thought that maybe I had just missed it or something. Then, the following day, I was told by management that they had caught the person who was knocking on my door. Apparently, for some reason, the door to the unit next to mine had been left unlocked. Somebody had been sneaking into the room as well as knocking on my door late at night. They were seen on the surveillance cameras. I'm really glad that the cameras were there. I was not told who it was or if they got in trouble or what, but after that, it never happened again. I used to be a pizza delivery driver. It was a job that I had for about a year when I was younger. The pizza place that I worked for was pretty good. I enjoyed working there. I remember that we had this one customer though that got banned from ordering from us. He would often call and order pizzas to his house. Then he would act really creepy or rude to the delivery drivers. 3 different ones had all reported him, sometimes multiple occasions. So our manager ended up banning him, and there was literally a note on the wall saying not to accept his order, because he would try calling and ordering, or ordering online, and we wouldn't let him. A couple of times after he was banned, some of his orders got through because we had forgotten, and that led to more complaints. I personally never had to deliver to him, but I heard from the other drivers that he was just not nice at all. I guess he cursed out one of the delivery drivers for no apparent reason once. Another time, he called one of the drivers a curse word, and then another time he tried to get one of the delivery drivers to enter his house, and when they said no, he literally tried to pull her inside. We ended up getting a new manager hired though, who was part-time. His name was Andy, and overall he was cool, but kinda bossy. One time when I was working as a delivery driver, he gave me a pizza and an address and told me to deliver it. I immediately recognized it as the banned address. I took it up with Andy, and I told him how the guy was banned and we weren't supposed to deliver there. Andy said that he had already took the order. He said, "Look buddy, just do one more delivery there for me." So it was apparent that I had to go, so I took the pizza and then left. I was kinda mad at Andy, but I was also curious how the creepy man would act. I figured maybe I could just give him the pizza, get the money, and leave without a problem. How hard could it be? If he wanted to yell stuff at me for whatever reason, he could go right ahead. I didn't really care. I didn't know if the guy was just a grouch or if he enjoyed being rude to people or what. Eventually, I arrived. He lived in what looked like a pretty typical neighborhood. I took the pizza, got out of the car, and then walked up to the front step. Before I even reached it though, the guy opened his front door and was looking at me. He looked to be in his 50s or so, had dark sort of long hair and a handlebar mustache. He also had an open can of Miller Lite in his hand. "Who the F are you?" he called out as I was walking up. I said, "I'm the pizza delivery driver delivering the pizza that you ordered, sir." He then told me to just give him the pizza already and shut up. So I walked up to him and handed him the pizza. I could smell the strong smell of beer as well as cigarettes coming from inside the house. I told him the price, and the guy said, "You expect me to pay for this crap?" That's when I got worried that I wasn't going to get out of there with any money. I told him, "Yes, I need the money." The man then said that he had the money inside his house, and I could go and get it if I was brave enough. I thought about it for a moment and thought, no, I don't think I am. But then I realized that I really needed to get the money or Andy would get mad at me. So I tried to do a compromise and I asked the man to go get the money for me. He said no. Then I reluctantly said that I would go get it. The man stepped back and I entered the house. It was very cluttered. There were boxes and beer cans everywhere. I stayed just inside of the door. The man then said that the money was in the basement. At that point I thought, heck no, and I turned around and just walked out. The man started saying something, but I didn't even care. I ran out of his yard and back for my car. He was yelling at me the whole time. I got in my car, left, and drove back to work. When I arrived back, I was furious with Andy. I told him that the guy was totally insane and we never should have took the order. Andy asked for the money, and I said how the guy didn't pay. Andy started to give me some kind of new employee orientation lecture about how I have to make sure I get money from the customers or the business will lose money. That really ticked me off. I literally started yelling at Andy that the guy was trying to get me to go into his basement. It got heated for a moment, but Andy ended up understanding, and after a conversation, he was cool about it in the end. After that, we never delivered to that guy again. This is something that happened last summer. I live in a house with my wife and 2 daughters. My oldest daughter is 19, and she was home from college at the time. My youngest is 16 and in high school. Between the 4 of us living at the house, we order things online a good amount. It seems like every other day there's an Amazon package on the front step or something like that. So one night, I remember that I was up a little bit later than usual. Both the girls were in their bedrooms upstairs, and my wife had just gone up to bed. I was about to go upstairs, but I decided to load the dishwasher first to let it run overnight. After doing so, I was passing by the living room at the front of the house. I heard the sound of a car door closing in the otherwise quiet night. It got my attention, and I glanced out the window to see a man come into view. This guy was walking in front of the house, and then he started to go into our driveway. I didn't see the vehicle that he had come from my view, but I did see that the man was wearing a blue Amazon vest, and he was also carrying a package. Now, I hadn't ordered anything, but I figured that either my wife or one of my daughters had. However, the strange thing is that it was 11:30 at night. I know Amazon delivers a lot, but I didn't think that they had deliveries in the middle of the night like this. Still, it was very possible, so I honestly didn't think too much of it. I was just about to go upstairs as I was standing at the base of them, but for some reason, I just decided to look out of the window to the man. When I did, he did not seem to notice me at all because the lights inside were out, and he walked up to the front door. However, he did not just put the package on the front step and then walk away like I thought he would. He stayed on the front step, which was out of my sight, for sort of a long time. Obviously, he did not knock on the door or ring the bell or anything. After like 15 seconds of him being on the front step, I got curious. I moved over to the window to see what the man would do. When I finally got a view of him, I saw him still holding the package, seemingly looking around, and then he moved away from the front step. Then he walked around to the side of the house. By this point, I was getting suspicious. After going out of my sight again, I went around the house to figure out where the guy had gone. I looked out of a side window but did not see him there. Then I thought I heard footsteps of somebody moving outside. They were towards the back of the house, and I walked over towards the dining room, which was at the back of the house. When I made my way there, I saw out of one of the back windows the man walk by for just a split second. Then I looked over to the back door and he came into view. I quickly ran over and turned on the light to the back. When I did, I saw the man then suddenly turn and quickly start running away. He took the Amazon package with him and went all the way back around the house. The guy did not stop until he went back off our property and into the street. I didn't get a good look at the car that he went into because we had a large tree in the way, but I did hear him get inside and start the engine, and then he drove away. I realized then that the man likely did not work for Amazon. It was most likely just a disguise to look like a regular delivery driver if anybody happened to notice him. I know that a lot of people work for Amazon and deliver at all kinds of times, but still I think people should always be aware of their surroundings and not get complacent. I went to bed after that, and the next day I told my wife and daughters about it. None of them were expecting an Amazon package to arrive overnight. It's very creepy to think of what might have happened had I not stayed up late that night. This happened way back when I was a kid. I was 10 years old and my family moved into a new house. It wasn't a brand new house, but a little bit newer and nicer than the previous one that we had lived in. It was in the same city as well, which was nice, so I got to keep the same friends. Living there aside from me were my parents and my older sister. So the neighborhood was pretty typical. Many houses, each with around the same size yard, all on one street. Literally one of the first nights after moving in though, I was up late. Everyone else had gone to bed and I was in the living room playing video games. All the lights were off, and the TV was providing the only light that I could see. I was planning to go to bed soon, but just having too good of a time gaming. My volume was on low so that I wouldn't wake anybody up or anything. I remember hearing outside it sounded like several cars were driving down the street. I looked over because the street and outside everything was dead silent. What I saw was these two SUVs driving slowly down our quiet road and then pulling over. They literally pulled over right in front of our house, and that made me a little nervous. So I paused my game and then crept over to the window. I was sitting on the floor, mostly out of view from the window, but I had a good view of the front yard as well as our front step. After stopping, both vehicles' doors opened. I saw about 5 or 6 total men get out of the back seats, and the drivers seemed to remain in the cars. I was so creeped out because all the guys looked kind of shady, dressed in dark colors and wearing hooded sweatshirts. None of them had masks on or anything, but I feared the worst still. I saw a couple of men start walking towards our neighbor's house, and then 2 men started to walk right into our front yard. My heart started racing, and I ducked down. After a few moments, I heard the men walking, and they got right up to our front door. Then, one of the guys tried opening it. Thankfully, it was locked. I was so freaked out, and didn't even want to look in fear that they might see me. I didn't hear anything though for probably a full 2 minutes, I would say. When I finally gained the courage to look, both of the guys were still just standing there. They were on the front step, and I had no idea what was going on. Then I had this idea. I really didn't know what caused me to get this brave, but I just stood up and went over to the door. I did not open it, but I turned on the outside light switch. This made the light go on that was outside on the front step. When it did, moments later, I heard the men turn around and start to walk away. Then I went back over to the window. I watched them return to the SUV and go inside. Moments after that, I saw 2 other men come jogging from the other direction of the neighbor's yard. Then they got inside the other SUV. Then, about 30 seconds after that, more guys got in the back of the other SUV. I was so confused. Moments later, both SUVs' engines started and drove away. I stayed up watching the street for about another hour. They never came back though. After that, I was finally able to go to sleep. The next morning, I told my parents about it. They had no clue what it could have been, but they didn't seem that concerned. Still, I was there, and I will never forget how scared I was in those moments. And looking back, I still don't know what exactly was going on. Going to someone's house like that after midnight couldn't be anything good, and they certainly were not salesmen. I used to work at a post office for a few years. I have one story of something really crazy and almost unbelievable that happened. So the post office that I worked at was fairly large. We were near a big city and would get a good amount of customers. Many people would come in to ship packages and things like that. Some people also had mailboxes with us there. I worked behind the counter helping customers, and then I would work in the back organizing packages and other parcels as well. One evening I was working with my coworker Andrea. The 2 of us were working until past close, which was 6 p.m. So overall things were pretty quiet that day. We had a few people come in here and there for whatever reason. By 5:30 things were very quiet. Andrea went into the back to do some work, and I stayed by the counter in case we got any more customers. Then, literally 5 minutes before closing time, this guy came in. He was wheeling in this really large box that was all taped up. He had one of those dollies that he was wheeling it in on. The man came up to me at the counter and said that he would like to mail the box. I told him sure, and I weighed and measured the box with the guy. It was really heavy, about 150 pounds, and I told the guy the price, which was pretty expensive. He gave me the address he was mailing it to, and the man then told me that inside of it was expensive gym equipment. Then I wheeled the package into the back, and the man left. Right after he left, I locked the doors, and we were closed. Then I went into the back with Andrea to finish working. We had some things to do, such as organizing parcels and whatnot. I remember that after about 20 or 30 minutes, we were just about done. I turned off some of the lights, and Andrea and I were talking a little bit near the doors right before leaving. Other than that, things were completely silent. Then, out of nowhere, we heard this sound. We were the only 2 there, so we had no clue as to what it could be. We walked over and looked to where the sound was coming from. The next thing we knew, we saw this guy inside the back room of the post office. He was standing up and fairly short and thin, wearing all black, and also had a ski mask on so we couldn't see his face. I had no idea where he had come from. Then I noticed the large box that the man had dropped off was wide open. The man had been inside of it. Neither of us knew what to do. The man just stood there for a moment, and then he started walking towards the front. He went over and left through the front door, leaving the post office entirely. Andrea called the police. She reported what happened, and we stayed there for a while not knowing what was going on. When things finally calmed down though, we were able to realize more of what had happened. There were surveillance tapes inside the post office. They would not get the identity of the man who was in the box because he had a mask on, but we did have the identity of the guy who tried to mail it. A few days later, I found out that they located both men. They had a plan to get the smaller guy in the post office, and then he was going to steal a bunch of packages, I guess. He was planning to leave the box after Andrea and I left, so he would have the whole mailroom to himself. However, he got hot and uncomfortable in the box, and also didn't hear very well from inside of it. He knew he was getting mailed right before we closed, so he figured that we had left already. Fortunately, we had not. That was by far the craziest thing that ever happened when I worked at the post office. One night back in high school, my buddy had a party at his house. The party was a good one, and late at night after everyone had left, it was just 7 of us who were all sleeping over for the night. His place was on the edge of a suburb. There are a lot of woods around the place that have always made me a bit wary. I guess I've always just been scared of the woods, I think. Anyways, 7 of us were in the house having a grand old time still, and we eventually decided to call it a night. Everyone went to sleep on the floor in the living room except for me, since caffeine really makes it hard for me to nod off, and I had a lot of pop that night because I don't enjoy drinking. I was also the closest one to the back door. About 30 minutes after everyone else was asleep, I heard some rustling outside. I kept my ears open, and I started to hear tapping on the back door. It was very quiet, and no one else woke up from it. I was sure that it was just one of the guys trying to mess with me, or maybe someone from the party earlier that night who had forgot something, so I got up and peered through the blinds. Someone wearing a skull mask was out there, which made me jump a bit. Even after he noticed me, he kept tapping, so I whispered through the glass, "Come on, man, knock it off." He still kept tapping, though. I turned around to find out which of the guys it was by counting heads poking out of the sleeping bags. I counted 6, however. All my buddies were inside. The tapping then stopped. I turned back around, and the guy was now pressed against the door trying to open it. At this point, I was almost frozen with fear. I dropped the blinds I was peering through and backed away slowly. Then I heard something. I don't know how to describe it. It was muffled and pretty far away at first, but then it seemed to come closer. Eventually, it got close enough that the guy stopped trying to open the door. The sound seemed to jump forward and change to more of a roar. The guy outside screamed bloody murder and booked it, and the sound followed him as he ran. A noise came to an abrupt stop after a few seconds. All my friends in the house had jumped up in panic. They asked me what was going on, and I was still frozen. One of the guys shook me while another 2 got up to look out the windows, but they saw nothing. When I was shaken, I came back to my senses and I told them what happened. Normally, I didn't think they would have believed me, but they heard that guy scream. We called the police about it, and they said they would look into it. We never saw anything on the news about it, though. The next morning, we decided to go out into the woods to look for the guy a bit. Normally, we wouldn't do that, but 2 of us were packing heat, so we went. Nothing was out of the ordinary, except that we saw a bit of a skull mask on the ground. I'm not sure if it's really as simple as that man outside got eaten by a wild animal, or if it was something else unnatural. The guys tell this story a lot though, and I'm usually too scared to talk about it. For a year, a long time ago, I worked at a convenience store. It was off this road with a lot of other businesses on it. My store was like the ones connected to gas stations, except we didn't have any gas. It was just a small store with lots of drinks, snacks, and a little bit of other stuff. So basically, I would work by myself during the night at the counter. We closed at 3 a.m. every night, so it would be pretty late nights for me. Usually, not that many people would come through for my shift though, so I preferred it to working a normal shift, because though the hours might have been odd, it was significantly less work. From the time that I started, there would usually be a decent amount of customers, but then as the shift went on, it would get quieter and quieter. After midnight, we would hardly get anyone. So one night, at around midnight, I remember that nobody had been in the store for a while until this one guy walked in. When I saw him entering, the first thing that I noticed was that he was wearing a clown mask. It was kind of creepy to see at midnight, but I also just figured that it was some guy trying to be funny. It was not Halloween time, so I wasn't very amused. Of course, working by myself behind the counter, when somebody enters wearing any kind of a mask, it raises suspicions. I thought that it could potentially be a robbery. The man walked in though, got within maybe 20 feet of me, and then turned and started looking at me. As he did, he was just standing there. I said to the guy, "Very funny, pal." He didn't respond and just kept standing there and staring at me. I said, "What do you want, a prize? Best costume of the day, there you go." The man still ignored me. After like another minute of us just staring at each other, the guy finally started walking away. He moved towards the other side of the store very slowly, still looking at me. It was very strange. At last, the man walked to the doors and finally left. I was glad to see him go. For the remainder of my shift, which was about 2 or 3 hours, I didn't see the guy. There was maybe 2 or 3 total people for the rest of the time that night. I remember when I was finally off at 3 a.m., I locked up the shop and went to leave. When I was walking out, I saw the clown man a ways away. He was across the street by the corner now, walking down the sidewalk by himself. He was the only person out that I could see at that time. I thought it was weird that I was seeing him again. As I walked away to go to my car behind the shop, I remember noticing him start to look over at me. I quickly walked away though and got to my car and went home. The next night, I worked again. It was the same exact hours as I usually did, so I would be getting off at 3 a.m. Nothing really strange happened during my shift that night. There was a guy who came into the shop and looked around for kind of a long time and then left without buying anything. But other than that, things were pretty quiet. Well, that night, after I got off of work at 3 a.m., I closed up the shop, left, and went to my car again. When I got there, something really weird happened. When I opened my door, on the driver's seat, there was a clown mask, the same one that the guy had been wearing. I was so surprised to see it that I jumped back, and I thought that the guy might be in my car. I looked inside though, and he wasn't there. I took the mask and tossed it, and then I went home. The next day, I was paranoid. Everyone that came in the shop, I wondered if it was the clown guy. I didn't see him again though, and I really have no idea how he got inside my car. I thought that I locked it. I guess it's possible that I didn't, or maybe he picked a lock or something. My car was kinda old, but I really don't know for sure, and it's all very strange. This is something that happened about 2 years ago. I was in college at the time, living in this old 2-bedroom beat-up house. I lived with my roommate named Robbie Anderson. We both worked part-time jobs as well as had classes at all random times, so I didn't see Robbie really that much. We were friends though, but not like best friends or anything. So one evening, Robbie was gone at work. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and I was inside watching On Patrol Live on TV. The living room was at the front of the house, so I could see out of it pretty good. I remember noticing something out of the corner of my eye. I looked over and saw this random guy who I didn't know just walking right into our front yard. This looked very suspicious to me. The guy walked up to the front door and then started to try to open it. Now, there were 2 doors there. The first was a screen door, and the second was the much stronger and solid regular door, so you would have to open up one and then the other to get inside. Both of these happened to be locked though, as we did not live in the safest neighborhood. I instantly got up from the couch and walked over to the door. After the guy tried to open the first door, he then knocked on it. I made my way over there and I opened up the first door. When I did, I saw the man standing there before me. He had a pretty large build, was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and had brown hair. I said in a borderline rude way, "What do you want?" The man said that he was from Amazon and he was there to deliver a package. I said, "Well, where is it?" The guy didn't have anything with him. He said that it was back in his truck, and it was policy that I had to sign for it first and then he would go and get it. I knew that I hadn't ordered anything on Amazon, and I told the man that. The guy then asked me if anybody else lived there, and I said, "What's it to you?" He claimed that he was supposed to deliver the package. It seemed sketchy, and I doubted that Robbie had ordered something like that. The man then ordered me to open the door so I could sign for the package. He said that it was very large and expensive, and I needed to help him get it out of his truck. I told him to get lost, and then I slammed the door in his face. The guy stood there for a moment, and then I heard him loudly curse at me a few times. Then he walked back through the yard and left. After he was out of my sight, I called Robbie and told him about it. Robbie confirmed that he had not ordered anything. I was glad that I didn't open the door for that guy. I mean, he wasn't even wearing anything that indicated he worked for Amazon, and he didn't even have a package with him. It was about as sketchy as can be. After that, I didn't see that guy again for the time that we lived there. A few years ago, I moved into a new apartment with a roommate. This was a much better living situation for me. The last place that I had lived was this house, and I literally just rented a singular room there. I had this tiny bathroom attached, and there was like 8 other people living in the house, which was pretty large. It was also old, and the only reason that I lived there was because it was cheap, and it was the only thing that I could afford at the time. So anyways, moving on to my new apartment, it was a 2-bedroom place that I was getting with a roommate. My roommate was this guy named Jack that I had known in college. We were not really that close friends, but he's a cool guy overall. So about a week or 2 into moving in, I recall that both Jack and I were at home. I had just gotten back from work, and Jack was already there. It was sometime in the afternoon, and I remembered that when I got home, Jack was in the kitchen. He told me that he was going to go to the store and asked if I needed anything, and I said no. So at that point, I went down the hallway and into my bedroom. It was really nice because we each had our own bathrooms attached to our bedroom. After going inside of my room, I went to the bathroom to take a shower. About 10 minutes later or so, I was out of the shower and getting dressed when I heard somebody try to open my bedroom door. The door was locked just because I was in a habit of locking the bedroom door from the last house that I had lived in. Of course, I assumed that it was Jack who had tried to open my door. I mean, who else would it be? I wasn't sure if he was back yet or never left. It seemed kind of odd because I thought he was going to the store. I was busy for the moment and figured that I would ask him what he wanted in a couple of minutes, and he hadn't said anything. Still, I found it kind of odd that Jack would just try to barge into my room like that. He had never done that before. I finished up getting dressed and shaved and then left my bedroom. This was probably like 5 minutes later. I didn't see Jack in the living room or kitchen area, so I went over to his bedroom. His door was slightly open, but I could tell that he wasn't in the room. I called out asking what he had wanted, but he didn't answer me. So then I went into my bedroom again and texted Jack. I asked him if he was at the store. He responded pretty quickly saying yes, he was almost done shopping. I realized then that it couldn't have possibly been Jack who had tried opening my door. Moments later, I heard the sound of the front door to our apartment open and then close. At that point, I called Jack and told him what was going on. He realized that he had forgotten to lock the apartment door when he left. I ran over and locked the door. Whoever had been in our place had left. Then I went back to my room. About 10 minutes later, when Jack returned, we both searched the apartment. Nothing was missing or stolen, and nobody was inside anymore. So who was in the apartment and why? We never found out. It remains a mystery, but neither of us forgot to lock the doors while living there again. I had this weird experience a couple of years ago. I was living by myself in an apartment and working in an office on the other end of the city. Most days I make coffee, but occasionally I get it from places. One day I stopped at the local Starbucks on my way to work. It was a nice morning and surprisingly quiet inside of Starbucks. There were just a couple of other people inside, and nobody was in line to order. Just one other person got there after me and went in line behind me. So I ordered the drink that I usually get. Then I took it and left and went to work. Now fast forward the rest of the day to the evening. It was like 8 p.m. or so, and I was at home in my apartment. Then, out of nowhere, there was a knock on my door. I had no clue who it would be, so I walked over and went to look out the peephole. Nobody was there. It was really strange. I opened up my door and I looked outside in the hallway to see. I didn't see anybody. However, I did notice that there was a Starbucks drink on the ground right next to the door. I was very confused, but picked it up. At first, I thought that maybe somebody had ordered Starbucks and it was delivered to the wrong apartment by mistake. But then I realized that was impossible, because the Starbucks drink would not just be delivered alone and set on the ground, and there was no receipt or anything. When I looked at the cup, I saw that my first name was on it, and it was the exact same drink that I had ordered earlier that day. I was very confused now. I didn't drink it though, because I had no clue who had delivered it to me. Something else strange happened the next day. When I was leaving for work, I noticed this guy kind of standing around outside the building. I didn't recognize him at the time though, and had never seen him around the building before. I was in the mood to get Starbucks again, and also confused about everything, so I went there. This time, it was much like the previous day. I guess that Starbucks location just usually isn't that busy, because it was quiet inside and there was no line. I ordered the same drink, and I noticed that as I was doing so, a guy walked in and got in line behind me. After I ordered, I got a better look at him, and that's when I put everything together. I realized that same man was the guy who was standing outside of my apartment. He was also the same guy who was in line behind me in Starbucks the previous day, and I realized that he must have been the person who delivered the drink to my apartment. Still, it all seemed to make sense in my head, but saying it out loud seemed crazy. I didn't say anything to the man. I just tried to keep better tabs on what he was doing. After I left, he didn't follow me or anything. I was at work and then went back home. That night, I did not receive another Starbucks drink at my door or anything. However, 2 nights later, I remembered that I noticed out my window seeing some lights. I can see part of the parking lot from my apartment window. So when I looked out, I could see that the police were there based on the blue and red flashing lights. However, I did not see exactly where they were. I was curious, so I walked out into the hallway and to the stairwell, which had a clear view. When I looked, I saw the police talking to a guy. It was the same man who I kept seeing. Why? I didn't know. I went back to my apartment wondering what the deal was with that guy. Well, I found out from a neighbor the next day that he had been stalking a woman who lived in the building, and the man didn't even live in the apartment complex. The woman he had been stalking had found out and reported him, and thankfully he was caught. However, I realized that it possibly could have also been me that he was stalking, and he seemed to know where I lived. Maybe things could have got worse if he wasn't caught. One night, I was driving back home from my parents' house through a rural area in southern Germany. It was late at night and a relatively quiet ride, until the road ahead was blocked by a long dead tree type of log. I was super annoyed by this because this was literally the only road available. It would take me another hour at least to backtrack and take a different way. When I got out of the car to further inspect the roadblock, I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Germany is tame when it comes to wildlife in rural areas, so there's usually no serious wildlife encounters apart from hedgehogs or deer. I started to move the log out of the way so that I could pass. The log was light enough that I could drag it across the ground by myself, but it took some effort. I don't know how long it took me to move it, but by the time I was finished, another car had stopped not far behind me, waiting for me to continue driving. At least, that's what I thought. As soon as I got back into the driver's seat and continued my drive, I noticed that the car was following me. At first, I assumed it might have been coincidental, because on a singular road with nowhere else to go, it was only natural that the other car would take the same route as me. But it got weirder as soon as I entered the next town and the car was still following me. I panicked, called the police, and informed them of the situation. I told them that I was driving home, so that they could intercept the stranger as soon as we arrived at my home address. Since I was relatively close to my house already, I knew it'd probably take the police a few more minutes until they got there as well, so I decided to park a few houses away to not appear suspicious. I continued to sit in the driver's seat and see if the car was still around, and indeed, the stranger even parked directly behind me. At this point, I had the pepper spray at the ready. The doors were locked from the inside, and I was obviously super anxious when a man got out of the car and walked up to my window. He was waving at first and gesturing towards the back of my car. Confused by this, I decided to roll down the window a tiny bit to ask what's up with the guy. The man explained that he had only been following me to inform me that while he approached my car on the roadblock, a stranger had snuck into my trunk and was probably still there. I was absolutely bewildered, yet terrified by this. I didn't believe the guy outside my window at first, but then he showed me that he also called the police prior to our conversation, so I trusted him enough to get out of the car. Soon after, the police arrived, opened my trunk, and arrested a guy that had been hiding in there. Turns out, my initial stalker was telling the truth, and he was really trying to help me out. I didn't find out the details of who the guy in the trunk was, but I'm assuming he had ill intentions, probably to break into my house at the least. The car I drive doesn't lock automatically, and since then, I've never drove around with an unlocked car. The scary part too is that in the car I drive, the trunk is directly connected to the front of the car with one of those little doors in the back seat. This guy could have potentially just crawled into the back seat from the trunk if he knew it was there. When I was younger, for a while, I used to work at a grocery store. I was 19 at the time and was just working there for the summer. It was a small town grocery store in the city that I lived in, and my mom was friends with the owner. That's basically how I got the job. The only bad part was that I had to work the night shift. So right before the store would close, I would come in. There would be a list of tasks for me to do, and basically when I got them all done, I could leave and go home. Except the store closed at 9 p.m. and there was always a lot to do, and it would take me until past midnight most of the time. Sometimes I would be working until like 2 a.m. or later, and when I worked, I would be the only one in the entire store. It was a little weird to be by myself in the grocery store, and most of the lights would be out by that time as well. There were just a few dim ones, really just enough so that I could see. Overall, it was not a bad job though, because sometimes I would be able to get off a little bit early. Some of the tasks that I usually did were cleaning, always stocking a lot of shelves, and some other random stuff. I would change prices, put up and take down signs and advertisements, and get the place ready for whoever was opening the next day. The grocery store was pretty small, but it still had just about everything that you would want. One night after I came in, I started going through the tasks. It started out as a pretty typical night. After doing a little bit of cleaning, I was stocking shelves near the canned goods. Out of nowhere, I heard a sound. It was the sound of footsteps. Somebody else was walking inside the store. This made no sense. I had been working already for about 2 hours, so we had closed a long time ago. Nobody else was supposed to be there, and nothing like that had ever happened before. I stopped what I was doing and listened. The footsteps were definitely a few aisles away, and they were walking down at about an average pace. Then the footsteps started to get closer. However, they ended up stopping, seemingly not that far away from me. Maybe in the next aisle over or the one after that. After not hearing the sound for a couple of minutes, I walked over to the next aisle over and looked in it. There was nobody there. I looked in the next aisle after that and there was nobody there either. As I was walking back to where I was stocking shelves though, I heard the footsteps again. They sounded like they were behind me, but a ways back and out of my sight. I turned around and looked, but didn't see anybody. Then I spoke, asking if anybody was there. No one answered me. By that point, I was really creeped out by the whole situation. Nothing like that had ever happened before. I decided to look all around the store to see if anybody was there. So I made my way slowly closer to where I had last heard the footsteps. The store was mostly dark, except for the dim lights that were kept on overnight. Like I said, it was pretty much just enough for me to see. I looked through a few aisles without noticing anything. Then I got to one aisle and looked down it. There was a man standing in it. As soon as I saw him, he looked over at me. Then he turned and started walking away out of the aisle. I shouted at him that we were closed and he had to leave now. He didn't say anything back. I walked after him in his direction. However, I had lost him and had no clue where he was anymore because he had quickly gone out of my sight. I heard him walking for a while, but then I stopped hearing him. At that point, I was just walking up and down all the aisles in the store. I was really nervous, wondering why the man was there and what he wanted. I should have called the police right away, but I was practically a kid still, and I guess I panicked. So after walking up and down the aisles for a little while, I suddenly heard the footsteps behind me. I looked back and saw the guy approaching me like 20 feet away. It was one of the scariest things I've ever seen. At that point, I just took off running. I made my way to the door and just bolted out of there. I ran to my car and drove home to my parents' house, which was pretty close by. Then I called the police. After coming to my senses and the police were there, I went back to the grocery store. My boss got called as well. The police found the man hiding in the back room. Apparently, he had been in the store before close and then just stayed in and hid someplace. Why, I don't know. I'm really glad that I got out of there when I did, though. I live alone in a house that I'm renting in a fairly average neighborhood. I moved here last year and something really crazy happened shortly after. So it all started one day when I noticed this car parked a ways down the street. It was across from my house and a little ways down. It sort of stood out because it was a red car, so it got my attention. I went outside to get my mail at the end of the driveway, and I remember that as I did, I noticed that there was a man in the driver's seat of the red car. I found that strange because I had noticed the car out there like an hour earlier. So had he just been sitting in the car the whole time? When I saw the guy, he was not looking at me, but looking down at, I'm guessing, his phone. I just casually turned around and then walked back inside of my house. It didn't seem like too big of a deal to me or anything. So as it got later, the sun started to set. I was passing by the front of the house and I noticed the red car was still there. But also I could see that the man was still in the driver's seat. And then I saw that his driver's window was down and he appeared to be taking a picture of my house or something. His phone was out and sort of pointed in my direction. I didn't think that he could see me or anything, but I moved away just in case. Several minutes later, when I looked, he was finally gone. It was a pretty weird thing, but he was gone now, so I figured that was that. As strange as it might be, I just hoped that he would never return. But I was wrong. 2 nights later, I was at home by myself, and it was much later at night now. I didn't have work the next day, so I was staying up pretty late. I was in my bedroom and I heard the sound of a loud bang coming from the back door. I got up and was instantly thinking that someone was trying to break in. After leaving my bedroom, I started to head towards the back door, but slowed down. I heard another loud bang and looked around to see if I had any kind of a weapon. I really didn't though. Maybe I am unprepared, but I just never thought that somebody would try to break into my house. I then heard whoever it was trying to open the back door to the house. Thankfully, it was locked. I went over and looked out of a window. I just barely saw what looked like a man there, but I couldn't really make out any details. Everything was happening so fast. For some reason, I did not call the police right away. Looking back, I don't know why. You would think that would be the first thing to go through my mind in that situation, but I guess you never know how you will react in certain situations until you get in them. So anyways, there I was at the back door with some guy trying to get in. I got this crazy spontaneous idea and took out my phone. No, I still did not dial 911. Instead, I went to YouTube and looked up a really loud and annoying alarm sound. I clicked on the first video, and thankfully I forgot to turn my volume up because an ad started playing. Then I skipped the ad and turned my volume all the way up and hit play. The annoying alarm started blaring, and thankfully it worked. The guy at my back door stopped trying to break in and he moved away. He then went back around the front and left my property. Then, after I calmed down a little, I finally came to my senses and dialed the police. They came out and looked around and saw some slight damage to my back door. I filled out a report and then the police left and said they would look around for the man. However, he was never found to my knowledge. I believe that it was the same man who I had seen days prior. I don't know for sure, but those two suspicious situations seem to be linked to me. Thankfully, nothing like that has happened since. Something really strange and creepy happened to me once. This was back about 25 years ago or so. At the time, it was just my husband and I living in our house. We lived in a neighborhood with many other houses on it, but it was generally pretty quiet, especially at night. I remember one evening around 7 or 8 p.m., I was looking out of our front window for whatever reason. I noticed that there was a mail truck parked on the side of the road on the other side of the street. I didn't know what it was doing there. We had already received the mail earlier that day, plus something about the truck looked off, like the mail logo wasn't quite correct looking. To me, it seemed kind of suspicious. I didn't see anybody get out of it though, and I couldn't quite tell if anybody was inside. Several hours later and I looked again, and the truck was still there. I found that to be very odd. Our street was not really the type that would have cars parked on the side of it a whole lot. There wasn't really much that I could do about it though. I know by the next morning, the truck was gone. So really I forgot about it until the next night though. This time, the truck came back again. It was later than before though. I was passing by the front window at probably 10 o'clock at night or so, maybe later. I noticed that the same mail truck was stopped on the side of the street. This time though, I saw movement in the driver's area. Then the door opened and a man got out. He was wearing a jacket and a hat, as well as sunglasses and a backpack. It looked sort of strange. Then he walked up into the yard of the people who lived across the street from us. I watched as he went up to their front step, and then he kind of got out of my view. I knew he didn't live there, but I thought maybe he knew the neighbors and was visiting. Still, I kept watching though. Soon the man appeared again walking down the yard. Then he crossed the street and entered our front yard. I quickly ducked down from the window. The man walked all the way up and then got to our front step. I could hear him there. There was a brief 2 knocks at the door before he turned and quickly walked away. I peeked out of the window to see the man walking back down, and then I saw him go into the next door neighbor's property. I then went and told my husband about what was going on. When he came to look though, the man was out of sight. His mail truck was still there though. My husband got curious and decided to go outside. I didn't know what he was going to do, and I told him not to go after the guy or anything because he might be dangerous. But when my husband opened the door, he realized that there was something on our front step. It was a single VHS tape. He brought it inside and showed it to me. This was a long time ago, so of course we had a VCR. We were both very curious as to what was on the tape, because it had no label or anything. We put the tape in the VCR and pressed play. It started out looking like a home video taken from a video camera, and it was showing out the windshield of a car driving down the road at night. There were no sounds other than the driving sounds. This continued for about probably 5 minutes. Then the camera turned, and we could see part of the man's face. He was still wearing sunglasses and a hat though, and only like half of his face was visible in the frame. He then started laughing in a really creepy way. This continued for an uncomfortable amount of time. It was enough to give my husband and I the creeps. Then it abruptly stopped. That was all that was on the tape. We looked outside and the guy was still gone. We thought about calling the cops, but decided not to. A while later, the man returned to his mail truck vehicle and left. It looked as though maybe he was giving the videotapes to everybody who lived on our street. Why though, I have no idea. After that night, he never came back. I never found out who the guy was or why he did that. Maybe it was just a strange and creepy prank. Either way, it really freaked me out. One night, I was leaving my girlfriend's house at around 3 a.m. because even though I could stay late at night watching movies on the couch, her parents didn't allow me to stay overnight. Anyways, it was a stormy, rainy night that included a heavy downpour and a lot of wind, making it difficult to drive home. My girlfriend lives around 25 miles away from my house, and I normally drive out to the main big highway to get home. However, on this stormy night, I wanted to drive for as little as possible, so I took a smaller back road highway to get home this time. I used the shortcut, which I regretted using on that day, because that way was barely lit and surrounded by open plains from both sides, so the wind was really whipping. As I was driving as fast as was allowed in the heavy rain, the few lights that were on the road were completely off. Power went out, I guess, so naturally I had to slow down. Using the headlights as bright as possible, I still couldn't see where I was, mainly due to all the water all over the windshield in front of me, and I was having trouble seeing the road. To make matters worse, it suddenly started hailing. I began to panic because I could barely tell where I was going. My windshield was fogged up, and I had taken my dad's car, so I was worried about the hail doing damage to it. I decided to pull over on the side of the road for a while, and not soon after, I saw what looked like somebody waving a flashlight. I stuck my head out the window to see better, facing all the hail and heavy rain, and I saw a man approaching me. He seemed normal to me from afar, but as he got closer, I noticed how unusually tall he was, which creeped me out. I couldn't see the details of his face from afar in the storm, so I closed the window and locked all my doors and tried to look from inside the car. The guy then started to wave the flashlight rapidly until he got so close that I could see his face. The man had a smile on his face, which was the definition of smiling ear to ear. It was so creepy, and he was mumbling stuff that I couldn't hear. I was literally about to soil my pants until I noticed another car approaching behind me. When I looked back to see the car behind me, the man either backed away or turned off his flashlight or something, because I looked back out my side window for him and he was nowhere to be seen. Granted, I didn't have much visibility, but I didn't see the flashlight that he had been waving around. I followed the car that was behind me as it helped guide me on the road until I finally got back to the main road. The rain had stopped for the most part, but I still had to drive slow due to the ice on the road. The drive was taking at least 3 times longer than it normally did, and I lost connection for a while, but as soon as I looked back to the road, I saw a black dog in front of my car. Despite how slow I was going, I couldn't dodge the dog. I got out of my car and looked behind me, but I found nothing at all, no indication that I had run over a dog or another animal. I ran back to my car, forgetting about the conditions, and I started to speed back home. A strange urge inside of me was telling me to look over at the plains surrounding the road. I would glance out on the plain from time to time, and I saw nothing. About 10 minutes later, close to my home now, I looked out my side window, and I saw a tall figure wearing white waving a flashlight rapidly out in the plains. I finally made it home safe and sound after what felt like a whole day's worth of driving. I have no idea what to think of the tall man with the waving flashlight, or what to think about the phantom dog I hit. A lot of strange things happened that night, and I even questioned myself sometimes if I was hallucinating and if anything was real. It was by far the scariest night of my life. This was in the early 2000s, and the exact reason I was driving that night escapes me now. But one autumn night at around 8 p.m. when it was already dark, I took a right turn off the main highway. It was a small neighborhood nestled between 2 cities of about 100,000 people each. The rain was coming down hard, and my wipers were on medium. I wasn't in a hurry, just driving, when I came around a bend in the road to a neighborhood with maybe 40 houses, a small cul-de-sac development. I remember approaching the bend and seeing a woman. She was about 20 feet ahead, standing at the end of a driveway, lit up by my headlights. She was wearing a tank top and jeans, her arms crossed tight around herself like she was trying to warm up. She was staring directly at me, not the car, but at me. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but my first thought was that she needed help. I was young, just trying to be a good guy, so I slowed down and rolled down my passenger side window. My car didn't have power windows, so I had to lean over and crank it down. She could see that I had to roll it down, and as I opened it just a few inches, she did something strange. She reached out with her hand and grabbed the top of the window, her fingers coming so close to my face that it startled me. At first, I didn't know what to think. I had asked if she was okay, but she didn't answer. I could see her face now. She was young, probably 18 to 22, her eyes red from crying, and her breath coming in gasps between sobs. I asked again, "Are you all right? Is everything okay?" She didn't respond, and she didn't even move. She just kept staring at me, tears streaming down her face, her fingers still gripping at the top of the window. The silence between us felt heavy. It was like she was in a different world, not hearing me, not even acknowledging that I was there. I thought that maybe she was just in shock, and maybe she needed help more than I could understand. So I offered her a ride, thinking that I could take her somewhere, help her out, but she didn't react. Not even a nod. She just kept crying, staring right at me. I felt like I was in a staring contest with someone who had lost their own mind. I don't know how long I sat there, but it felt like forever. I glanced down the road ahead, not sure what to do. Then I looked back at her, and something shifted inside me. I didn't know what was going on with her, but something about the whole thing felt wrong, like I was supposed to walk away. The tension in the air was too thick, and fear started creeping into my body. I said I was sorry, though I wasn't sure why I was apologizing, and before driving away I said, "I don't think I can help you." For a moment, she didn't let go of the window, but then her fingers slipped away, and without another word, I drove off into the night. I never thought much about it again, at least not until later. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered if she was in some kind of trouble, or if it was a trap. I'll never know what was going on with that girl, but I don't think I'll ever forget her eyes, and the way she just stood there in the rain staring at me like I wasn't even there.